Hello. So here we are. Let me adjust my camera. I've got it on this arm thing, so it gets messed up. I'm a little late this morning. I was trying to set up some fancy pants stuff. I have another talk from BT that I wanted to summarize and go over, but I thought it'd be fun to do like a reaction style video thing. So I tried to get it hooked up in VLC, and of course the audio stuff didn't work. This stuff is all very fiddly, but I'll figure it out. Maybe I just need to do like everyone does. Sorry about all this, and just do it straight from YouTube. I don't know. Maybe next time. In the meantime, I'll do it in a weird kind of way, which is probably more efficient. Anyhow, so today I'm going to go over that. Now, this is a talk from Spring One Platform, and what I wanted to do is kind of go over the way I think about going through these videos, rearrange it a little bit. Like the original talk is great; it's worth your time putting in there, but you can see the kind of close reading sort of style that I try to do, and I also want to show you the things that I like about it and kind of draw out my thinking about it. So the other thing I want to go over is we'll see if I have time, but I always find that all of the advice about how to deal with the psychology of children is actually incredibly applicable to how to deal with people. And I had an experience this morning that I thought would be an interesting thought exercise in sort of mindset shift. I'm obsessed with coming up with these mindset things for this book that maybe I'm going to work on, and I'll use that as a launching off point for it. So let's get right down to it. Hey, I'm averaging about 3 to 5 viewers, which is great. I appreciate that. But if you like this and you want to help out, it'd be great if you help me recruit other people. I think if you do that, I don't know what this means, but you can become like a VIP or something. And, maybe the other people who are doing the Tanzu TV would think that was a terrible idea. But I don't know what I'm doing. We'll try to figure that out. Why don't you look up what that means? But also just help me promote it. I think people pay attention a lot to LinkedIn, as far as I can tell. I just use it as like kind of a promotional trash hole for most things, but people seem to like it in there. So maybe that's a good place to promote stuff or whatever, but it'd be nice to get more people paying attention. I actually had some feedback yesterday. I wouldn't say feedback, but someone wanted the slides I went over, which is great. That's fun stuff. So let's go into looking at this. Now, I don't quite know what I'm doing here, as always, but we're going to figure it out. So we got this talk from Spring One Platform. I think I'm going to get set up with some sort of Hugo situation and GitHub repositories so that I can update show notes and stuff, which is, I'm just looking forward to that. That's going to be thrilling. Let me see if I can adjust my alignment here, because it just, I'm not into that alignment. So let me fix this up here. Can I expand this out? I was going over, Nate on my team, he started a show. Oh yeah, look at that. And then I was going over how to adjust things. So this is a good, yeah, I guess my camera's just off center. Whatever. I'm sure you can cope. But that's a reminder, he actually did start his new show. I think it's Between Chair and Keyboard, which is the joke. That's where bugs come from. But he started with an interview yesterday. If you go to twitch.tv/VMware Tanzu, you can check it out there. Also, just go to tanzu.tv. You can see everything, the schedules for stuff. So anyways, here's this presentation. Now, you remember our last episode, I had an EBC with the telco, so I'd been studying up on BT things. This is an example of one of those talks. I think this might be the 5th time I've watched it, because my mind wanders and I get distracted. And so I sat down this morning after dropping off the kids at school, and I used that situation where I had my iPad split screen so I could just focus and take notes on it. So you can see, here's what we got going here, and then, we'll get to my notes. But I wanted to play this originally to go through it. But let's start off at the end, right? So I think I actually have, I think he was part of the people I did this little tour with BT, the Canvas team. And, he's one of the folks who's kind of advocating for using the platform internally, which is nice. So I like to start with the dessert, with the benefits at the end, right? So I'm going to jump to the end where he went over things. And there's a couple of technical things in this presentation that are good, but I think what I want to point out are the, let me adjust this here. I want to point out let's call it the sort of like strategy and business way of thinking about this. I think there's a good story in here of why putting a lot of time and money, as he says, into digital transformation. And remember, when I say digital transformation, what I mean is getting much better at how you do software so that you can start to get better at your business and use your software as the primary way of doing business and interacting with your customers and internal stuff. I mean, I don't know what else to call it, getting better at software. But there's a good touch point that he continually has where he's talking about the reason we're improving how we do software at BT, the reason we're doing container-based applications, the reason we're using the Tanzu stack to help out with this is because the business of BT in the UK, if you don't know, is they've got telephones. I think they have fancy industry names for this, like fixed wire or something. But telephones, your internet or broadband, and TV, and they probably also provide this for businesses. But in the consumer group, if you think about those businesses, right, you've got all sorts of competition. There's always this. If you go way back when to this is one of the foundational concepts for how I think about strategy. If you go back to, I think it's David Eisenberg, I forget, it's like eisen.org, but you should go look this up. It's his kind of write-up of the stupid network. And this is back in the Clue Train days where things were just wild and crazy on the internet in the late 90s. But the stupid network thing it's a derogatory term, as stupid usually is. And it says that if you're in the networking business, right, so you're like the phone company, a broadband provider, someone like BT, you don't want to just be a stupid network. Now, Eisenberg was trying to make a point that it's good to be a stupid network, but I think what's proven over time is it's actually strategically pretty terrible. I shouldn't say terrible, that it's not as great as other options. So a stupid network is basically how you probably think of the internet. There's really no features except performance and pricing to it. It's a dial tone, as people like to say. All sorts of metaphors we use. But it's just something that as a consumer, you don't really care about. Like, that said, you care about it when it doesn't work. And like here in Amsterdam, I use Ziggo. And the internet here is insanely fast. It's like 300 megabps up to 450. I don't know what that means because megabps is one of these things where, like, I don't know why they don't just say megabytes per second, something that I can conceptualize. I don't know what a megabit is. I always have to go look up how to translate it. Whatever. Network and engineering people love screwing around with numbers in an unconsumer way. Suffice it to say, it is super fast, right? So I appreciate that. And of course, I would pay for faster. But when it comes to services like Facebook and Netflix, doing your online banking, you don't really care about the network, and they sure don't care about the network, right? So they want the network to be stupid. They don't want it to be locked up, to have differentiating features to it. And so the point of the stupid network was that if all you're providing, well, Eisenberg's point was that it would be nice to have stupid networks instead of proprietary networks and things that are all fiddly, because then it makes the overlay of the applications you can do a business on that. But the implication of that is that you don't want to just be a stupid network because you'll become a commodity and you'll be pushed around by the likes of, your Netflixes and Facebooks and the actual things that go over the network, right? Those will become the things that capture and, from a way of thinking about strategy, control customers. Well, let me adjust this some more, because wouldn't it be cool if you could see my gesticulation? I mean, I think it would be. You can leave a little chat there and tell me if you don't like it. But what it means effectively is that you don't want to be pushed down to a commodity, right? So anyways, fast forward, as they say, to nowadays. And what you have is companies like BT and pretty much every other telco that we work with and that I've talked with, Comcast, T-Mobile, Orange, Dish, on and on and on. And they want to be smart networks, or they want to not so much be a smart network. They want to have their stupid network and focus on cost and performance, right? Like Ziggo here is for me. But they want to collect premium profits by overlaying on, their own stuff onto that network. So they often offer TV. They often offer phone service. They often bundle with mobile, right? They've got that mentality of like, we do networking stuff. And then also we own the network, which is an incredibly hard industry to get into. because it requires a huge capital outlay, dealing with regulators. I mean, you look at even, Google, who can do anything or whatever, right? And they've been trying to get into networking forever. And they have some network here and there and things like that, but like it has not been super easy for them to sort of take that over like they would other things. It does cause nice competitive pressure. Like I remember when Google was introduced into Austin, all of a sudden AT&T broadband became faster. It was miraculous. It was very exciting for us who enjoy fast internet. Anyhow, so that's the basis of how this talk kind of starts off, is that we need to focus on making customer experience better, right? Because there's more choices not only are there more choices in other providers you could pick, for example, for TV, but we want to encourage people to have loyalty and interest in buying more stuff from us. I think this is a part of CX, customer experience, that gets overlooked a lot, is you're not only competing with competitors, but you're sort of competing with the ultimate competitor of customers doing nothing. So you want to increase spend. So you want to make customer experience better. The way you do that primarily nowadays is to take a product mentality. You pay attention and you're curious and you learn from customers. And kind of the tool you use for that mostly nowadays is software. So you improve the way you do software. And if you remember like kind of the fundamental theory here, you want to be able to get software out faster, experiment with things, always be removing bottlenecks to not only get new features out and see how they're working, but this also means, if you're walking back, removing bottlenecks of what it takes to get software out the door. So the end results from kind of thinking that way and improving software, like there's a couple of things that are really great to highlight. And that is, so there's this idea of a journey, right? Which is basically like, we used to call this a wizard back in whatever time, but it's essentially like a journey is just, fancy, modern day design talk for like, what's the wizard someone's going through? What is the process, the steps that people go through to accomplish some goal? So the one that they're going over here, the application that they've picked, sorry, my mouth is so salivy or whatever. I'm sure that's an audio treat. Anyhow, is if you're an existing customer, all they're looking at here is you want to buy what I think they call the BT Sport Pass. I don't know about sports, but I imagine it gives you a whole array of sports that you can watch. So at the end of what they've done here, right, they've almost reduced by half, more or less, like the steps it takes, right? So it's much more efficient for a customer to go through and make the selection after this. Now that you can see, they've also paid attention to the time that it takes. This is the person who presents it, by the way. The time that it takes, the efficiency of getting a person to sign up has been reduced, right? So the mechanical steps it takes for a person, the time in their life, the toil, to use SRE terms, that a user goes through has been reduced. And that has resulted in, I don't know the period of time, but whatever, let's not concern ourselves with that. That's resulted in a 15%, here's a fun term, uplift, or a 15% growth in conversion, right? And conversion basically means someone was interested in something and now they've given you money for it, right? They've bought it. So, across a huge customer base like BT, I don't know what they charge for a Sport Pass, but 15% conversion uplift is huge. That's a huge amount of revenue. Not only when you come to, lifetime customer value, or I forget what that is, that LCV, but when you get to a reoccurring revenue, a subscription thing, you also look at all of the out years, and I forget what the churn, you probably have a pretty low churn rate. Like, when's the last time you canceled a mobile or a cell phone service thing, right? A broadband TV thing, right? So you're not only getting that revenue right now, but you're signing up for more revenue that you can sort of depend on more and start to report on as expected revenue that you have, which is great. I guess that's ACV. I don't know. These are all sassy terms that I should probably know. So those are great business results, right? And the fact that those business results, right, are being shown on top of the technical results, that shows like a huge type of mindset shift that's important when you think about digital transformation, is you want to focus on that. So now let's go back and let's look at my notes and see kind of like some of the ways that they sort of got there. So let me minimize this because you don't really need to see the thumbnails. But the thing that he starts off with, right, and hopefully I didn't write any derogatory comments in here. I should look at that real quick. But he starts off with so if you think about, again, those end results, right? Let's flash back to them. We want to get to the point where we can do our software so well that we're reducing the time it takes to do something in the journey, so we get to conversion rates, right? So, and to do this, we're paying attention to, let's use one simple application, the Sport Pass, right? And the thing for setting that up. So immediately, let me condense together a bunch of stuff. They're already following the pattern that I see going over and over again, which is when you want to change how you're doing your software, you want to do your transformation, you start with something simple. You start with one thing that is an actual business-facing thing that maybe isn't such a big deal. It's hard to express this. Now, Jana Werner has a great way of putting this, which it's a unimportant/important thing, right? So if you think about that one feature, it's of a granular enough nature that if you make improvements to it, it's going to matter. You actually have a user base to test things out of. It's part of the real business. And also, as he gets into, it's a good cross-cutting thing that will touch every part of the system. And as they kind of accidentally figured out they were doing, you start to learn all of the changes that you're going to encounter when you scale that up, right? So he has this concept, or they have this concept he goes over. He calls this a lighthouse project. And there's a great metaphor that he has there, because you hear lighthouse a lot. But as he says at some point, I know I wrote it down somewhere, but it's going to shine the way of changes that you'll have to make, right? So you're kind of like charting out what is this going to look like when other people follow on, and what are you going to discover? So anyways, the first thing that he goes over is you start encountering like this monolith that they have. Now, let's see if I can scrub to the right place. VLC is not the best for scrubbing, but this is kind of like the monolith that they have, right? And, oddly enough, I should bring this up, but if you remember the Netflix microservices thing, it looks exactly like this. So, everything becomes a spaghetti mess eventually. It just manages how you monitor it. But this monolith is like all of the things required to do commerce, to sell products, to monitor products, to add in something like a Sport Pass, a new feature. And all the dependencies and stuff end up looking like this, which results in basically, I was curious in going through this, like, what does that actually result in, right? Like, what does it mean that you have this? What are the bad things for it? And essentially, what it ends up meaning is that you have a lot of dependencies that you have to worry about. So when you make one change, it requires testing out that you haven't broke other things if it's a service that you depend on. But it also means that often when you want to add new features to a UI-facing thing, you have to go out back and sometimes make modifications to other things, right? So if you think about, I'm extrapolating here, I don't know if this is the case with them, but from other things, when, for example, when I wanted to unlock my iPhone in the US, right? Nowadays, it's a lot easier, but it used to be that you would have to check out what your contract term was. I think I was with AT&T at the time. You have to check out what your contract term is, see if you're eligible for unlocking it. Then you have to send in a request, which means looking at your phone's, I don't know, IETF nonsense number. And somehow you've got to cut and paste that into this form on a web page. You submit that, then they send you an email for it. Then eventually it's just nonsense, right? And if you've ever worked on enterprise systems, you can tell there's a bunch of integrated systems that don't work together. Now you could be cynical and be like, this is a money losing proposition for them, so they want to make it hard, kind of like filing expenses. But let's just not go down that path. But the point is, you've got all these separate systems because there's multiple monolithic things, and they're relying on me, the end user, to do the integration of all those dependencies. So all sorts of things kind of slow down that system. And when you're worried about breaking things, you also slow down because you don't want to break things. So you want to test things out. So you end up having that issue. And if you think about the goals they have, right, they want to reduce the friction for signing things up. They need to kind of attack what's going on there. Now, I was thinking as I was looking through this, what is a counter example to that? And I think I remember reading some article that it was a couple of years ago, or there's a big splash about how Netflix was very happy that they had converged into the same code base for all of their clients. And indeed, we watch Netflix on this Sony TV we have in our house there. You can watch Netflix on your phone. You can watch it on an Apple TV. You can watch it on your desktop. And it's all the same experience, the same UI. And so it is interesting to think about, the UI is a I don't know. Like maybe I'm confusing look and feel with the way that you would divide things up, but there is kind of this concept of the one Netflix application. That it kind of looks the same everywhere instead of being specialized across there. So, generally, I think when people talk about monoliths, it's mostly about the dependencies that they have and not necessarily the architecture. And that's why it's easy to say that, like, it's easy to joke around that this looks a lot like your microservices dependency things, right? It's more diagrams. It's not quite the same equivalence, but whatever. I think, and then we can go to the issues, the problems that he has. He's got lines of code in here, which is fine. I don't really necessarily know what to do with that, but this is the part that becomes interesting, and it's good to kind of harvest for knowledge of things, right? So also part of the organization here, and I think this is where some of the monolith stuff starts to be interesting. Let's see if I wrote down enough notes on that. But you kind of get to, let's see, what do they want to do? Yeah. So these are kind of problems that you start encountering, right? Just to highlight them. And this is good if you're trying to think about what can we generalize about why you would shift from a monolith. So there's this coupled experience, which I was going over an example with my unlocking phone thing, right? Like it's almost there's too many dependencies and I have to integrate all of those things. And also that's where scattered logic comes up. There's a lot of ironic things, right? That by having one monolithic thing, you have all these strange other workflows that you have to go through. And there's change cycle gets to be long, right? Because you're worried about breaking things and QAing. And then also, I think from an organization level, there's this point that he gets to where I think there's an interesting thing that he says about teams, right? And I think this, people love Conway's Law or whatever, where like the your communication paths, which is to say, there's like a vernacular understanding of Conway's Law, right? And Conway's Law is technically the communication paths in your organization will draw your architecture for you, will drive your architecture. I think what most people take Conway's Law to mean is that the structure of your hierarchy will look like the structure of your organization. And that assumption is that your hierarchy dictates communication paths, but, no need to be so precise. Anyways, there's also a monolithic organization structure, which I think is worth looking at and thinking about the consequences that you have. So here, you've kind of got this tops-down monolithic way of thinking about things, right? And the different parts of the monolith tend to mean that it's not really illustrated here very well. So maybe I shouldn't show this diagram. But you tend to have separate teams, right? Like this is the back office thing. This is the back office to check. Like at one point, you use as an example of like, what if someone just wants to add new data to their phone, right? So you would have a back office system that would say, is this person, like, are they eligible for this under their plan? So then I got to look up the plan. And then if I want to, what offers do we currently have? So then I got to go to the system that shows them various discounts and plans for adding data. What pricing do they have for this region, for this plan that they may be in? And then if they want to submit the order for adding in extra data, we've got to collect payment from them, verify the payment is added. Then we've got to shoot something off to another system that basically says modify what their plans are. And that probably goes to a billing system, so forth and so on, right? So, if you have different parts, systems, and teams working on all of this, they tend to sort of like locally optimize on what they do. And I think there's a point that he doesn't so much make here, but that I was thinking as I was watching this is, if you're oriented around these different systems instead of the processes people are going to, you kind of start to lose track and knowledge and authority to do something. There's not sort of like the one team who's in charge of everything related, or at least knowing about everything related to adding data or doing something like adding a BT Sports Pass. And one, that sort of makes you lose track of making sure that entire experience is good. And I'm kind of arguing a little bit against microservices here as well. But I think the other thing I was playing around within my mind is that it makes it really hard for the business unit to like know who to talk with, right? And here's kind of the notes I was writing to myself is like, and again, this might also be a microservices problem. I don't really know how to do this, but if we've divided up all of these different systems, and we have teams that represent all the different systems, like the payments people, the check data people, all of that. Like if I'm like the business and I want to make it easier to pay for the Sport Pass thing, like who do I go to? Like who is the central team that is in charge of that and can help me like make that the best experience possible? And so I think that's a good way of arguing about of thinking about, let's orient the teams around these experiences that we have. And sure, you kind of orient around the back office sort of things that you have to do, but there should be some interface, some representation of that product that the business side can go to and work for that. And I don't think that's necessarily resolved here, but you can start to kind of see how that becomes a concern that you might be interested in. Now, there's something else I remember going over here. So if you look back to the various concerns that came up here, I think when you've gotten to the point where he says that big system is a 16-year-old system, and this is very typical of big legacy systems. People are looking to modernize. I think I put together monetize and modernize there, but that is they're really looking to figure out. Well, they've encountered, and I don't know if this is the case with them, so let me generalize, but when you encounter problems like this, you're looking at a type of technical debt that you've accrued. And that is like this technical debt of like not being as agile and easy to use in the services as possible, right? And he comes up with an example here. One of the things that they discovered, and this is kind of an interesting lighthousey type of thing, right? Let's see if I can scrub to the slide for it. I guess this is like the slide he used for it, a visualization here. And that is, so they wanted to run the new apps in public cloud. Now that's an interesting follow-up question for them, is like, why did you want to run in public cloud? Would be fun to learn. But in doing that, they needed to access on-premise data, probably like their ERP and CRM system. And of course, those ports were not open, right? They couldn't go back to the on-premise thing. So they had to go work with the networking and the security people. They had to spend a lot of time to get that set up. And the framing that he has going over this is this was, again, to that lighthouse thing, this is something that was more or less unexpected and unplanned for, that you would spend so much time on it, that they discovered. And I think these kind of things that you go along and discover, they're great, right? In that you are fixing them. But it made me think, and again, I don't know if this is necessarily the case with them, to be nice, but like whenever you encounter these things where like you've got to go to some other, whether it's data people, networking, or security, and that doesn't really fit into the self-service way you want to do things, it was making me think of something I remember, maybe it was from the Deming book I was listening to or DevOps stuff, but in general, one of the types of technical debt that you have is you sort of rest. And you don't really think about, when you're providing a service like security or network access, at some point everything's fine, and you don't think about how can I constantly be improving this, right? You're not sort of training, putting into training stuff to, what am I trying to say? The metaphor here is that I don't do any exercise, but I imagine if you're a marathon runner, you don't just like the day or the week before the marathon you're going to run, just suddenly go through, file a ticket, so to speak, and try to improve and change the way that your lungs and your heart and your stamina work so you can run in a marathon. No, instead what you do is you train for a long time. In fact, people who are always doing this kind of thing, they're constantly in training, constantly improving and getting a little bit better. Now, if we go back to like, let's say security or data access, I don't get the sense that in the IT world, people are thinking about, even if no one's asking for it, I'm constantly making this run better. Now, you probably have constantly people are probably asking you to always reduce the price of it, so you're always thinking about that. But you don't think about, how can I make it easier for people to use this? How can I make it more secure or more self-service? And that's, I think, a part of like constant learning or constant improvement that most IT people, they don't really do. And you see that come up as a roadblock or a bottleneck, all sorts of issues as they encountered with the network access, right? So that's something to look out for, that it may seem like wasted activity, but actually the easier that you can make all of your processes to use, you can kind of like detect these bottlenecks before, and then when you actually need to start using them, you don't incur that debt that you have. So let's cruise along here some more. So this is another thing that I think was interesting to kind of aligns with a lot of the stuff that I'm always thinking about. And that's back to this idea of what your team organization looks like. And it made me think that of something related to kind of this mindset shift that I think I'm always after here. And so what you encounter a lot when it comes to changing how you do software is that you need to set up independent teams that have all of the resources, the roles that they need to operate, right? So we call these product teams in like Tanzu land. And on that product team, you have developers, a product manager, designers. I think in the case of BT, they had a scrum master. I'm not sure if they had a designer or not, but whatever. And these teams are fully dedicated to one of those products, right, that I was kind of going over earlier. Now, as I said, this is in contrast to kind of like functional-based teams, right? We're the data team, we're the ERP team, we're the UI team, and work on various parts of the UI and so forth and so on. And, I don't know if there's sort of like a principles-based way of proving that a team-based way is better, right? Like, it's hard except through case studies, which, the problem with case studies is you're always mixing up causation and correlation, and then or coincidence, and also just luck. These 4 types of things, right? It's hard to kind of prove that doing things this way caused something good to happen. I mean, at one point, like you've got enough case studies and experience that you kind of build up this intuition of doing things. But at first, it's hard to prove that having a product-based way of doing things, having these more unified teams actually leads you anywhere. And so I think this is one of those things that I'll have to think about for thinking about a mindset book, is that like you just sort of have to take a leap of faith that organizing in this product-based way versus a functional organization is going to work better. Because, I mean, the reason you have a functional-based organization is because intuitively it seems like a much better way of doing things. And it's hard to kind of convince people of, I think the fundamental problem that happens is that once you're distributing you're spreading the responsibility for something like signing up for a sport pass across many different teams, you have this kind of command and control mentality of like, we're going to specify what it needs to look like. Each of these teams will fulfill their part of it. And like, because they're responsible professional people, it'll end up being good. And we'll have coordination meetings where people are coordinating that. And we're going to, this is what the UI is going to look at. And we're going to have business analysts who are making sure that actually it's done, and QA people that catch that. And the developers and the designers, in their own way are going to put their best efforts forward. And you have this, I don't know, it sounds kind of cynical to put it this way, but there's always a fine line between cynicism and how things actually work. But you just lose this fidelity as you cross all those team boundaries, and you're constantly passing this understanding back and forth. And it also takes a lot of time to do that communication. You can use a lot of social science stuff and a lot of kind of like computer programming lore to show that this is bad with your passive communication and your, what's the guy? The number of people I forget what that number is, the number of people that you can keep track of, and so forth and so on. But like, I don't know, that's a whole bunch of stuff to just like have faith in or distract yourself with and learning and understanding. So I think when it comes to this initial thing of splitting up the teams based on like that product that you're doing, you just have to have this belief, this mindset shift that it's going to be a better way of going about doing things. So that's an interesting thing to reflect on in a lot of what you talk about. A lot of what people talk about here when they go through their case studies is essentially, that having product-based teams is better. And I'm suspicious that beyond just case studies and experience, that like there's much that you can do to really win that over here. So here is, again, we kind of, there's a lot more in the talk. I would encourage you to look at it. But those are like some of the reactions, so to speak, that I had in going through it. And just one more thing. I was thinking this kind of goes back to the, the spaghetti bowl, right? Like, he goes over that, they're using domain-driven development and all sorts of things to break up the domains. But I think there's a good principle that no matter what type of services you use, you're always going to end up with a spaghetti bowl, right? Like, whether it's, your Netflix microservices diagram or the monolith diagram here. And there's another part that I think that's worth bringing up is that, you know, the dependencies can be technical, right? But I think a lot of the issue comes in when it comes to the meatware, the people dependencies that you have, right? The policy that you have to follow, that you have to follow to like open up those network ports or do things securely, right? And you need to treat those sort of human systems as part of this diagram, right? Like if you overlaid all of the meetings and the process and the audit and policy that you had to go through, in addition to this, it probably would be an even more confusing bowl of things, right? It's interesting to think like for all of these little data points, it would be fun to put more little points of what are the security review boards, the governance review boards, the regional regulatory things, just like the business decision, if we're going to do this business or not, like those reviews, and to kind of draw dependency area lines to those, you would have an even bigger monolith, right? A monolith that included like the human side of things. And so it's worth thinking about how do we change policy? How do we change the way we're doing things to reduce those dependency lines and accelerate things as well, right? So don't get so hung up on just the technical dependencies that you have, but think about what it means as they had to go through to just open up a port to, in a secure way and figure that out. What are the other dependencies that you have in sorting through that? Which I don't think that, you know, he necessarily goes in too much, but it is something worth thinking about when you're sorting through your transformation there. And I think you know, that's also a way to really fix your monolith as well. So that's, you know, again, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to look at as far as like how you put together the mindset and the strategy and the reason for doing things. And of course, you know, I wouldn't be talking about this if they hadn't worked with all of the Tanzu stuff to help kind of enable some of this. And even as I recall, like kind of figure out the way to get things running here. And it was really nice. Like in December, I traveled around with them a little bit to do that very vital part of transforming, which is, you know, on as much as possible, going through and telling all the different development groups, all the different locations that you have, doing some training and advocating and internal marketing for it. I don't know if I was the best fit for doing that. I was a little too macro for what people in the room wanted, but it was nice to go around and visit with people. So I'm going to take just a little break here, and then I'll be back with the how to like use listening for stuff. It's a terrible intro, but with the closing out thing and something now. While you're waiting, you know, VMworld is today, September 29th through October 1st. It's totally free to register. Just go search for VMworld. You can probably even go to vmworld.com. I don't know. Now there's you should look up like Paul Kubernetes, and there's a session that he's doing that I have a little appearance in. But there's all sorts of great sessions. Search through for Tanzu and other things. You can get an idea of not only how we do Kubernetes things for you, but also on the developer end, kind of how we're helping out with that developer experience. And I think there's also a few customer talks and things like that. Plus, the whole rest of the world of VMware that's out there for you to explore. But I'll be right back. I really just want an excuse to use this fancy interstitial that I have. All right, how was that? That was fun, huh? You get to. I put some fun guitar music in there. A little Django Reinhardt. Sorry, it's just picking my ear. You get to see the reality of everything. Anyways, as I mentioned yesterday, we got my daughter a fancy little pink bike at the low price of €60. I think the chain that I bought for her cost more than that bike did, which maybe is poor business planning on my part. Um, but it's a good chain. Hopefully, no one steals the chain, which I think would be a default in the chain. Anyhow, we were biking to school. We got about a depending. It's for me, it's about a 15-minute bike ride, and for the kids, it's about like 25, 30 minutes each way, depending on what happens on the way. Like this morning, so I don't know what happened, but at some point, she wobbled and kind of she didn't fall off of her bike, but her bike fell down, and she's actually to the point of what I'm gonna go over here. She's actually really good at not falling, right? Like when a bike wobbles around, you just sort of stand up and then you don't fall. But for her, that's frustrating because she has a bit of like when it comes to this bike, like a perfectionist streak that I don't know if she's sophisticated enough to like be disappointed in herself, but she's disappointed that she's not doing well. And this instantly somehow often gets translated into being my fault, and then she gets upset at me, which is fine. I guess I'm happy to be a sink for disappointment. But in trying to get her to stand up and start pedaling again so that we could get to school, I was trying to rely on some psychology I read in some kid book and kind of related to this other thing, what do you call it, nonviolent communication that Bridget, who used to be on my team, she sort of referred me to. And this also ties into this whole like airport book sort of trend of talking about how to listen. So let's see if I can pull these three things together. So what I read, I think it's like the whole mind child. And as always, I think reading about kid psychology stuff is fascinating because I find that you could just remove the kid part and you'd have good psychological tricks because it tends to work with adults just as well, unless they're like overly analytical thinking and kind of ruining the tricks that you're doing. But when your mind, especially a kid's mind, like goes into crisis mode, it just goes into I don't know the parts of the brain. You got the lower brain and the upper brain or whatever. But basically, you just go into lizard brain mode, and this never happens to me, as my family will attest. I'm always cool and level-headed. But like, so there you are, bicycling around, and your bike falls down, and you're upset. And when you're in this lizard brain mode, for whatever reason, the rational part of your brain doesn't engage, and you're just like upset, and you won't really listen to reason. And instead, you need, according to the authors of this book, which is great, in the audio version, as with all self-help books, they spend a lot of time on stories over and over again. So if you listen to it, you get the audio version on 2x speed, and you even kind of skip ahead sometimes when they're telling stories. You can kind of go through just the nonsense case studies that they have. Like I find with these books, it'd be nice if they just, like, it's like I've already bought the book. You don't need to convince me that you're right over and over again. Just tell me the tactics, right? Like I don't want to buy a hammer and then like every 20 minutes when I'm using the hammer, I don't need like a little hologram to pop up and tell me how great hammers are and that this hammer is good. They should just get out of the way and hammer. Anyways, but when you got this lizard brain problem, as a parent, I think also as a manager in a large organization or a change agent, your first instinct is to appeal to a rational thing and be like, but look, this way would be better. Like this, you're reacting against like doing things in a new way because you have fear for it. It seems frustrating. And you instantly want to go like, oh, but everything's fine. Let me lay out this, in a very rational way. It's been proven to be a working methodology. You just have to try again. You actually been making great progress at it, so everything's going fine. These are all things that when my daughter gets frustrated or bike riding, I tell her, right? But of course, the lizard brain doesn't care, right? It just wants to be like really frustrated. But instead, what the whole brain stuff and a little bit of nonviolent communication kind of gets to is what you want to do is the first thing you always want to do is like acknowledge that the lizard brain is unhappy, right? I think that's part of what the lizard brain wants is it just wants people to be like, yes, you're in a bad state. It wants acknowledgement that it's cool, of its existence. And then you want to have, this only works, I guess, with family is the sort of the kid books recommend like having some sort of physical connection, like, you know, hugging or touching or whatever. I don't really know in a corporate setting what the equivalent of that is. There must be maybe like going to get coffee, right? These kind of like social things where you're kind of like shifting to some sort of better human, softer connection to switch things around. That's probably like why in a lot of like change management stuff, there's like all these ridiculous games and things that people like to play because it kind of gets you into that more human setting of stuff. You can tell I'm one of those people that when people use psychology tactics, I just get more upset rather than whatever. It's probably good for me to just slink off into a cave and get over my upsettedness than being manipulated. Kind of a cynical way of putting it. But anyways, so you know, what I was trying to do, and it's hard for me to do this, but I try to just be like, yes, that's very, I don't mean to put it in a snarky way, but yeah, it's very frustrating, you know, to fall down, and you just sort of acknowledge that. And then it's difficult sometimes because, you know, sometimes kids don't want to be like hugged or whatever, but you just, the other part that I think the reason why this method is so frustrating is you just have to like wait. Which when you're under the time pressures of getting somewhere in time, right? Like this is another reaction that would be very poor to the lizard brain, which I've used many times in the morning going to school, which is like, you know, we have this fixed point in time that a thing must happen by that we have no control over. And then we have to pay a lot of money if we're late a certain amount of time. So that rational discourse, that rational reasoning should be a reason that we should get to school on time rather than whatever else we're doing. But those appeals just make the lizard brain more upset. Now, similarly, if you're in a corporate setting and you're trying to convince people to change and they don't want to change because they don't think they'll be able to do it because they fear losing their job or they fear their responsibilities changing and they're having this lizard brain reaction, like it's probably a bad time to talk about how, you know, the FANG or the four or prevailing headwinds or macro conditions or competition is going to cause a damage to the corporate strategy and trickle down to revenue, which will eventually trickle down to their compensation and even jobs. So they just need to get over themselves and their fears and realize that there's a rational reason to get to school on time. Like it just doesn't really work. Now, similarly, across these two things, like this is the part that in like whole brain thinking and listening and nonviolent communication that they don't really like spend enough time prepping you for is like you just have to wait and kind of sacrifice the things that you want to focus on, right? So in a corporate setting, like maybe things are going to proceed slower with change than you were expecting. And in order for your staff, your employees, the people that you work with, the humans, to kind of be brought along and ultimately be productive and not just sort of go complete lizard on you, like you're just going to have to slow things down and take your time and modify what you thought the schedule was. Now, there's some tactics to that, right? You know, as I was just talking about with the BT stuff, like starting slow, starting with one project or two projects and slowly ramping up rather than thinking you're going to do everything at once. That's a good way to accept doing slow stuff. And it's also a good way to kind of build up credibility and walk people through it. And, you know, as the BT guy was going over, you have a lighthouse thing to kind of explore and figure out barriers that you're going to have. But you don't always have that luxury. You're just going to have to like wait. Now, this also gets to the listening thing, right? So if you look at all, there's, like I said, there's a whole bunch of airport books nowadays. I don't know if anyone like buys the airport books. By that, I mean those, you know, books that are business books or kind of productivity books or books that are self-help books they used to call. But there's a huge trend in like people are bad at listening in their life and in their corporate setting. And so we're going to go over all these skills of how to listen better. And to what end are you listening better? I think there's, you know, just being a better person for the person you're talking with, but it's also sort of like collaborating better and discovering things. Now, what they sort of don't tell you about listening, I mean, they do tell you this, but there's not really like the salving that they need for it to help you out is like, when you're listening, you're not talking. And when you're doing this whole thing listening, you're not even listening to yourself, right? You're not supposed to be sitting there thinking about what's an idea this generates? What reaction do I have? How does this like help formulate ideas in my head? Which for me is very difficult because that's kind of how I learn and figure out new things is I'm always reacting to other people saying things. But again, it's this thing of waiting. So you're adding in wait time and you're removing yourself doing something, which I think comes up in the lizard brain thing. Now, I did find a book recently I haven't read, which is interesting. It's called something like How to Listen and Talk Better, which sounds like a great combination. Because I think the thing that's always missing out from the listening books and listening lore I've led so far is like, someone has to be talking for listening to occur. I guess it's one of those, if a tree falls in a tree, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it. I mean, it's literally a metaphor of that. Like in order for a listener to be there, a sound must be made. So I think it's also worth thinking about. Maybe this will be the, airport books go in this whiplash thing where they talk about everything should be this one way, and then everyone follows that one way, and then a couple of years later, like, oh my gosh, there's a deficiency, so we got to go over to this other way of doing things. So maybe we'll get to like how to talk better, how to talk to be heard. There's also another good kids book I haven't read that's how to talk so kids listen, and listen so kids will talk or you understand them. But I think that comes up again with the lizard brain thing, right? So you've got to wait, you've got to kind of like take that cue, and eventually what happens is everything's cool after waiting and maybe sort of comforting the lizard brain, or at least saying that it doesn't need to feel bad for itself. And then she stands back up and starts biking again. Now, years later you'll laugh at it. The funny part of it is that like about a minute later she fell off her bike again. Again, didn't fall off. The bike fell down and she was standing up. So we had to repeat that cycle over again. But then again, we got to school, and we actually got to school at the optimal time. We didn't get there too early where we got to wait around. We got there to school just as the classes were walking in, which is exactly the time you want to get to school, because then it minimizes your wait time there. So it actually turned out to work out well. But I think the longer term thing, whether it's corporate change or learning to ride a bike, it kind of comes from the the safety culture DevOps thing, is that like a mindset that you can have that I struggle with all the time is like every time you screw up at something, you're not actually screwing up. It's a chance to sort of, you're forcing yourself to practice, and you're also forcing yourself to learn, one, what went wrong with the system, and two, like how can you recover from it? But you're also just practicing, right? Like a bike is a good metaphor. Like it takes some time to learn how to get your body to just like balance the bike and not fall over. Similarly, when you're doing a project like the BT stuff we're talking about, right? Like your team's going to have to go through this cycle over and over again to learn how to think about what those business requirements are, how to align what a customer journey is, how to discover ways to like remove steps from it and remove the wait time. And they're just going to like screw up at it. Or, as we say in kind terms, how to learn from it, right? And how to go through that. So you've got to have that wait time and the expectation of how you're doing. But eventually after doing that, they're going to build up the intuition, just like riding a bike, of how those things go. So, and I remember I was telling Alejandra, my daughter, this a little bit ahead of time, is like, you're going to fall a lot of times. That's what happens when you ride a bike. But what's important, and the lizard brain doesn't care about this, is that eventually you've got to think about, every time I fall, I've got to think about why that happened and kind of learn from it. And it's really beneficial actually to fall, because, you want to have a bunch of little falls and little catastrophes instead of bad ones. And that way you kind of learn and you can build up the intuition of what. And in fact, when I was in my head as we were bicycling there, doing kind of a post-mortem, I think you're supposed to use some other word than that, but an analysis of what happened, I remembered back to what actually caused all of this, not caused it, but made it a bigger problem than it was. And that was, so there's this cross street, and you've got all these kids who are biking to school, and they go on this cross street, and there's this huge mob of them. And like a lot of teens, as I was joking with my son, they don't really think about the world outside of their skin and their immediate environment. So they're just are as we like to say, hauling ass down the street in big mobs of them. And so you've got to wait until that mob passes, especially if you have got, someone who's learning to cycle, because then, you can go through there. But instead, I don't know why, for some reason, I sort of picked the wrong window, and we were kind of forced to go along with the mob, which made us go a completely different path, which is like a whole other set of navigations than we've been used to. And so all the way back, and this is a very dimming mindset, right? Or dimming way of thinking about it, is like the executive in charge, which is to say me, I set up the complete wrong system and direction and strategy, which caused kind of a not necessarily a cascading series of failures, but it brought up new challenges, which added a whole bunch of friction to the system. And so while later on there might have been some like small errors, like my daughter's head was all like busy with like this new way of doing stuff because I hadn't really like laid out the way of doing stuff. Similarly, if you look at corporate and organization change, right? Like it's really important the way you manage this so that the context is set up correctly. And again, this is why it's good to start out small and kind of like build up that credibility rather than doing everything at once, because you don't want to do everything at once and kind of like just throw yourself into that mob of kids and kind of be forced to learn when there's a lot of things going on. I don't know. So maybe that's something. So I was 10 minutes late. So we got 6 minutes overtime. So by my accounting, that's 4 minutes of time that I have left. So I don't have the show notes thing set up, but I think if you go to Tanzu.tv, I have a little strip of video there. And I've been told that I can start maintaining my own show notes. I think that's one of those things where like someone is happy that I want to do it on my own, because then that means they don't have to do it, which is totally fine. I'd rather control it all on my own. So I think I'll be able to start going there and add those show notes in. Now, tomorrow, I don't believe I'll be broadcasting at 11. I think, let me look at the calendar. I have something scheduled to broadcast at, 4 p.m. Amsterdam time, which is Central European time. And I have an interview with one of the a Kubernetes community manager that we have. I haven't heard him pronounce his name yet, so I won't try to pronounce it. But I'm going to have him on to go over what I really want to talk about. I've got two reasons. One is a not-so-secret one because I'm going to tell you, but the other one is the ostensible reason. I want him to go, since he's a community manager for Kubernetes, I want him to talk about, like, if I was a developer, how does the Kubernetes community work? Like, what is it? What are the touch points? Like, in any open source community, you've always got at least three communities going on, even with the ASF, even though they try to kind of escape this third one. One, you've got the community of developers who work on the project, right? Kind of the internal facing, we're working on this, we're the coders, we're the tech writers, whoever is running the production of that software. Two, you've got the community of the people who use that software, which we kind of call that developers, not entirely accurate from a Kubernetes standpoint. You have developers and operators. And then three, as often happens, you have the community of vendors, the people who are trying to monetize that open source code base. So those are usually the communities that you have around any sort of software project, especially open source one. When it's closed source, that developer community is the company doing it or whatever. So it'll be fun to see like how he describes what the communities of the Kubernetes world that are relevant for developers who want to get involved in it. And I think that discussion, developers knowing how to use Kubernetes and fitting into the community, I don't think it really gets discussed very much because it's a very operation and an internal facing dialogue that I find. So rather than broadcast at 11 tomorrow, that's going to be at 4 p.m. I'll go update the schedule or whatever. And then also, again, if you want to see all the other stuff that we have going on, now I broadcast at 11 a.m. European time. Everyone else, because they're back in the States, they do it on American times. But if you just go to Tanzu.tv, you can see the other stuff that we have. And I think we have stuff going on daily across the developer, architecture, and Kubernetes world. Everything that you would want to know about VMware Tanzu. And as a reminder, VMworld will be going on, I think, with American times today. So you should go to VMworld.com and check that out. So with that, I always enjoy feedback, just to know that people are out there, whether you've seen this live or otherwise, and send in something to tell me if there's any topics you're interested in going over or questions that you had. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.